Let's go.
Okay.
I am super excited about my guest today, Melissa Richey. Melissa is the Texas Territory Sales Manager for MTL Holdings, and she started in the construction industry in 1995 as a switchboard operator for a scaffolding manufacturer. She was promoted to a sales position after a year and kiddingly says she must have been really good at answering that switchboard. She's been in sales, business development, and management ever since. Melissa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kate, for having me today.
You are a good friend of someone else who's been on the podcast, and that's Michelle Jones, who
Yes.
is equally awesome. And when I asked her who I needed to get on this podcast, she said, "You absolutely have to get Melissa." You and I had a conversation the other day, and we just clicked, and it went so quickly. I'm sure today we'll have no trouble filling the time. Um, First of all, I would love you to just give us a very brief overview of what is MTL Holdings.
Sure. MTL Holdings is a holding company of three different companies, Citadel, Metal Era, and Hickman. And we provide edge metal and wall panels from the top of the building to the grass.
So you are definitely in a male-dominated industry, and from what I've seen, you can definitely hold your own. One thing I've noticed is that you record LinkedIn videos, and you seem very comfortable doing that. And video is scary for a lot of people, but it's our world now, right?
It is. It is. I learned it through, just like everyone else, through the pandemic.
And
Lighting all these rings and cameras and,
right,
check your lipstick before you go on. Just
that's
little
right.
things.
Close the blinds. You've got side light and you look great. But for me, the side light, man, these 11 lines between my eyebrows are just out of control. So we've got to control this. So
Yes.
um, I would love to hear your perspective on what makes a great salesperson, what has helped you through the years. As you told me, I won't mention any numbers, but you are a little older than you look. So you've had quite a few experiences. And I would just love to have you talk to us about what you think is important in sales, and what has gotten you where you are today.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. There are so many people I'd love to thank, but going back to that first job, I was going to college and going to community college at the time. Answered that switchboard really well because after a year they're like, "Hey, do you want to go into sales?" And I had no idea what these scaffolding frames were all about. But I took a shot. I took a risk, which is important in sales. Don't be too risky, but I took a risk on a job that I had no idea about. But the best thing about that was I had great mentors. I had great female mentors and male mentors that were really like my cheerleader. They showed me the ropes. They taught me about sales. They taught me about listening instead of speaking, which is really tough for this Italian girl. And that's what it's all about, is just listening and finding those good mentors, male or female.
Well, it's a good reflection on you that you have those mentors or had those mentors, probably still do. And I'm sure you're also passing that on to other people. And it's great to hear this has been a common theme that men are also really mentors too. Uh, and when there is, friction between men and women, I think it's something that maybe men are just uncomfortable sometimes working with women. And once they get to know you, they are very supportive, and that's it sounds like what happened with you. Um, you talk about listening, and as we just mentioned, not only for you as an Italian girl, but as salespeople, it is really hard to listen. So, tell us more about, how do you go about that? Do you have certain questions that you ask? How do you delve down into what a customer really will benefit from?
Well, I can tell you that I'm myself. I wear my heart on my sleeve, which at times is a detriment. Um, I think in general, just be yourself, go in with a smile, ask questions. It's so easy for us salespeople to jump across a table and show them a brochure. That's just one of those things that we used to do. And now it's different. There are so many different tools and techniques to really prospect, to pick up the phone, right? And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Just be yourself, pick up the phone, ask questions, ask probing questions, ask the questions they can't just say yes or no to. Just really get down to the bottom of why did they schedule that meeting with you?
That's good. And I've talked before about just being curious. And that's what it sounds like you are, just curious. You want to know. It's interesting. Michelle made a big point also about saying be authentic. And I think people can totally sense that. You and I can sense if somebody's not being authentic or if their goal is to just close the sale. I was just reading something and it was talking about how there's this language around sales that is going by the wayside, but still killers and being hungry and closing deals, and nobody likes to be sold like that. They want someone to get to know them, to really care about their success so that you can provide a solution.
Exactly. Well put. That's why you wrote a
So
book.
that's right. I did write a book. I wrote a book, and one of the concepts is the moose, and that is your target market. And of course, that helps you make more sales when you're talking to the right person, right?
Correct.
How do you go about qualifying a prospect when you're working with them?
Well, I guess find out your needs. So with my position, we work with distributors, contractors, manufacturers of roofing. It's just there's an awful lot of channels, and consultants and architects. So there's many different lanes we can go down. I think the biggest is the relationships and really finding who the right person is. Not only that, but what is their passion? What do they need for their company? Really get to know what's behind what they need.
Also, I'm sure this is the case with you, that sometimes the customers don't know exactly what they want, or they think that they know what they want. So by getting deeper on a deeper level and finding out what their end goal is or what will really serve them the best, I'm sure you end up recommending things that they hadn't thought they needed.
Absolutely. And in fact, with the product that we have at MTL, it's a superior product. Not everyone can afford it. So we try to come up with some solutions for them at, a product that's great, but maybe they can't afford the Maserati. And I think that's really important too, to know, what's their budget?
Exactly. So
What's specified too. That's probably the most important. What is specified?
because companies have parameters they have to work with. And of course, I know that your company sells a superior product. And of course, there's the argument that the value in the long run is better. But if someone just doesn't have the money, then there's only so much you can do, right?
Correct.
Now, let's go back a little bit to video and just facing fear in general, because that has also been something that women have talked about. Obviously, the women on the podcast, like you, are very successful, but especially in your industry, like you said, tomorrow you're leaving for Vegas to go to is it the International Roofing Show?
It is. It's in Vegas this year. So I'll be there from tomorrow for National Women in Roofing. We have Women in Roofing Days for 2 days this year, which is really cool. And then the show starts. So I'm there till Thursday.
Now, will Michelle be there?
Michelle will be there. I don't
Oh
know if I'll
boy.
actually see her except for maybe, coffee in the morning, but our schedules are pretty aggressive.
Right. I know you guys are both go-getters. So are there things that you've done to stand out or compete with the men or claim your seat at the table, so to speak, with the guys?
Well, I've been in this for decades. And of course, if I could go back, I would have changed some things. But I think also when you go through experiences and maturity is a lot of it too. In the past, I probably would have yelled back at somebody. Now I'm pretty calm, and I like listening a lot and helping the young people, especially the young females in this business, whether they're an architect or a consultant or they're working the front desk at a contractor. All that's important, just to be mentors for others. I like to give back. I like to pay it forward. I can say everything hasn't been rosy in 25 years, but that's where you learn what to say, how to say it, what's your tone. That's all important. And practice what you preach, right? So if people know, for me, it's faith, family, everything else in that order, and I don't alter in my life at this stage at 49, if I can get those first two right, number three is pretty easy. And I think people know that about me. So they know that what I say, it's my word, and I'm trustworthy.
And I was talking to a client, I have some consulting clients, and when I was talking to her about what sets their company apart, actually, she's a co-owner, but she said she's not a salesperson. But guess what? Nobody else sells for that company. So I think there are a lot of small business owners who end up in selling when they didn't think they would. But she said, seriously, one of the things that sets her apart is that she follows up. And she can't believe how many times people will say, "Hey, thanks for calling me back," which of course seems obvious. And I hate to stereotype too much, but I think women in some ways are more detail oriented, more conscientious about that. Um, Again, it's not universal by any means, but just the sense that I get from you and what we've talked about earlier, you find out what their preferred way of communicating is, and you do that.
Right. It's really important to follow up. I think that's one thing. We have four different generations now in the workforce. And I have a brother who's 24 and I have a sister who's 52, right?
Wow, that's quite
We
a
have a really
range.
big family. So
How many kids are there total?
just three, but
Very well
things
spaced.
happen with parents. Yep. I have a much younger brother and he's a texter. My brother does not call. And I have a lot of customers now and architects and consultants and contractors and manufacturer reps. They're all in their 20s. I feel like the OG now, like, the
Yes,
mom of the group, which is great, but I have to know their style. If I call someone in their maturity age, they still like a phone call. So pick up the phone, don't be afraid. And honestly, people can hear when you smile over the phone. So I'm a glass half full kind of girl, and I like to stay that way. And I think people also listen when you have a good attitude.
for sure. And when I first started doing this podcast, a friend watched it and said, "You need to smile more." So, I get so intense and focused. I'm frowning and concentrating, but you're right. People can tell your body language and your smile even over the phone. I was thinking recently about all these animated movies that come out that have stars, big stars that voice the characters. I'm
Hmm.
sure you've seen this too. You see them in the booth when they're recording these, and they are literally acting out the part, even though no one will ever see them. So if you're listening, that's really important that your body language, you're not slumped over, you're not frowning, and people can really sense that. And for young women listening, and the listeners range in all ages. And I have a client, I'm not going to mention who. She's awesome. She's the CEO of a company, and she is in her early 80s, very
Oh, really?
wise, very successful. But there are also young women listening, and it's encouraging for you to say, "You've matured, you've grown." That is totally the case with me. And I'm sure you noticed in the first part of my book, I talk about chickening out on a sales call. And in those days, I was cold calling and I was so intimidated. I was calling on a lumber yard, totally out of my comfort zone. And then this big load of lumber is delivered, and all the men came out in, like ants on a little ant farm. And I was like, "Oh my God," I felt so out of place. And in those male dominated industries, you can feel that way. But I'm sure as your experience is, you just have to make yourself do it and then you get comfortable.
It gets easier. And I would say for anyone new going into sales, or if you've been in sales for a long time, don't think that everyone really knows you. I think it's really important, at least for me. I'm on the board for National Women in Roofing for the North Texas chapter. I'm on the board for IBEC, which is Building Envelope Consultants. I'm not technical like them, but I love my role in it, which is the education committee and outreach, community outreach. I love that stuff. And I love construction. I'm the only one in my family who's in construction. I don't even know how I landed here. it's just been so rewarding. And the relationships and your best friends you make along the way is the best part of it. And I mean, it's so cool. In fact, the best thing is when we need something done around the house, my husband's pretty handy, but I can tell him which sealant to use, which sealant not to use, what's going to work, 32 degrees and rising, what won't. I mean, all those little things that you learn along the way, you realize, wow, I mean, I know more than most. It's crazy.
I'm sure
Or at
you
least my
do.
husband.
That's funny. It sounds like he takes that well. He's probably
He
like,
does.
yeah.
Yeah.
I still remember years ago, we get our lawn done now, we get our yard done. But years ago, my husband, Steve, the uncopyable Steve, he always mowed the lawn. And one time he's on the road and I mowed the lawn. And I was so proud. I'm like, guess what? I mowed the lawn. He's like, oh, that's good to know that you can mow the lawn. And then I was kind of sorry because I got stuck doing it, uh, but I sold mufflers, automotive mufflers, and catalytic converters. And I know that you have come to really appreciate the construction industry, roofing industry, making structures better, or whatever the benefits are. I'm sure there are many. But I'll tell you, honestly, I was never wild about automotive mufflers. I mean, there were cool things about it, like you could have mufflers that were performance mufflers and they didn't have as much back pressure. And so they'd be louder and the cars could go faster. And so I totally knew the benefits, but I was not excited about mufflers. However, it was all about relationships. It was getting to know the people, making friends with them, adventures. And you have the whole state of Texas. I want to touch on that a minute, but it's all about the relationships. Back in the day when I was calling on physical customers, I loved to make promotions for them, to lead clinics so that they knew the product better, sales meetings. I do have a funny story about a sales meeting. We were meeting at night and they were going to serve coffee and I probably brought donuts, of course, right? So they
Yeah.
have a coffee machine and I asked if they could make some coffee and the manager said, sure. And the coffee pot, which had been sitting on the burner all day, and I am a coffee connoisseur. I hate old coffee. He turned it on and poured it back through the coffee maker to heat it up. So I'm sure you've had lots of adventures. And at one time, I covered Washington, Oregon, parts of Idaho, Montana, and Alaska.
Oh my
So it
goodness.
was crazy. But you cover a very big state. And how do you handle that big territory? How much travel do you do?
So I'm an Ohio girl, originally born and raised Cleveland,
That's how you know
Ohio.
Michelle,
Go
right?
Browns. Yes, that's how I know Michelle. And I got a job promotion with a company back in 2013 and I moved down here. I moved away from everything I knew. Family, friends, I had the dog in the back seat and we drove down during an ice storm from Cleveland all the way to Dallas. And I didn't know anything. I mean, I remember putting up a map on my wall of just the state of Texas to figure out where everything was. Now, after 10 years, almost 11 years, I've been to every part of this state except for Laredo. And every part of this state is different. It's like coming from Ohio, I think we're 5 to 6 Ohio's in the state of Texas, 2 state of California's. When you really look at the mass and how vast the state is, it's huge. And there's 5 different parts of the state. The Panhandle, East Texas, West Texas, El Paso, Houston, then you have Galveston and DFW, Central Texas. Each of the climates are different. Not only that, that's important for construction because you have to know the weather, but you also have to know the people. The culture's different depending on what part of Texas you go to as well. So it's been very rewarding. And I'm just so compassionate about this state. I was meant to be here.
That's awesome. And like you said, Texas, it's huge. I didn't know they had different climates. And like you said, that affects the building industry. But I do know just from the states that I covered, the culture is very different. The viewpoints are very different. I mean, Washington is the west side of the state is super liberal. Then everything east is conservative. And, I never talk politics with my customers. I'm guessing you don't either.
Try not to.
No, but yeah, it's really getting to know the customers, but also being sensitive to that. So how often do you see a customer? I mean, you probably don't see them very often, and then you just keep the relationship going, right?
It's tough to manage Texas if you're not living here. I've seen it from afar. It's very hard because the state is so big. You really do have to live here if you're going to manage the state. The territories are huge. We have two different time zones. I don't think most people know that.
I
El
didn't know
Paso's on,
that. No.
yes, El Paso's right underneath Albuquerque, right underneath New Mexico. So they're on mountain time. So you really have to know like what time zone are you in order to call your customers. And also travel time. There's a lot of windshield time when you are in Texas. It's not just, driving from DFW, from Dallas to Fort Worth. That could be an hour and a half because of traffic and everything else. And a lot of states have that too. But I try to plan my schedule out 2 to 3 weeks in advance and then always follow up to make sure the person's going to be there. Life happens. People have families, work projects. Sometimes I'm just not all that important, and that's okay. If people say, hey, I can't do it tomorrow, can you come next week? And then, I have to try to fix my schedule to accommodate. But pre-planning is the most important. Get with the right people and just don't zigzag across your territory. You just want to make sure you make those qualified calls and you just get those relationships.
Well, and that's might seem like a minor point, but that's a great reminder to confirm with every customer you're going to meet with, especially if you're driving a long distance like that. You don't want to get there and they're not there for whatever reason. So that is important. And it sounds like you block your time. I'm sure you do. That's what I did too. You plan a week of travel
Mhm.
and then you spend office time as well.
Mondays are always my office day. I use that to start the week off, get ready. It's like you're your own cheerleader. Let's get out there and go. I built a she shed in my backyard and
I
it's 10
love
by
it.
10. It's
A
great.
she shed.
It is, it's made out of metal. Go figure. If there's a storm, I'm coming back here. I have a door that locks. I have windows and air conditioning and heat. I mean, it's great. And this is my office. I mean, this is where I come every Monday and sometimes Friday afternoons because it might be a little bit slower. But every Tuesday to Thursday, I'm typically gone. And I love it. My husband, he met me as a traveler, and I think that's how we stay in such a great marriage, too. I think the travel sometimes helps. He gets Netflix all to himself.
That's right. He gets the TV, probably gets to watch all the shows you don't like, and absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah.
For years, my husband traveled. Then that came to an end at COVID, partly because of COVID and partly because he's older than me and just was ready to pull back and just work from home part time. But I have to say, I kind of miss that. So it is nice to have that break. And I loved traveling. I actually traveled before and during the time that we were married, and I always thought it was fun. I don't know if you do this, but there would be maybe little museums along the way or little sightseeing things and pop in and make it kind of interesting. It sounds like you think it's a fun adventure as well.
It is a fun adventure. I've been to pretty much every state in the United States because of work travel. And then I can tell my husband about it, like Albuquerque, Santa Fe, one of my favorite places to go. I brought my husband on our trip for just the two of us because I loved it so much and the people were just great. And, it's so rewarding. And hey, those points don't hurt, right? I mean, luckily my company lets us keep our points. Not everyone can.
Um,
I would say also that traveling for work, I think decades ago, even maybe a decade ago, before COVID, I would probably, when I got back from my calls, I would go down to the bar and have a glass of wine, sit at the edge of the bar. So there's only one person next to me, not two, or I'd sit at a table and do my expenses. And I think, geez, I wasted a lot of time doing that. I could have been doing something else. And now, like you mentioned that you go to museums, I do the same thing at night, right? Or I find church. I find churches in the area and I know their schedule, so I'll go to church at night. And I just love it. It's just something different, keeps me centered, and I'm not hanging out at the end of the bar, which is no problem for a lot of people. But for me during COVID, one of the most rewarding things, one of the best things that came out of COVID was hanging out with my girls, but we all decided to quit drinking for a dry January. And then we all just kept doing it. So for 3 years, me and my gals, we just watch movies now, or we go to museums together, or we go to mass, or we do whatever else. And we're typically in bed by 9 o'clock now, not midnight.
Well, that's good. And I mentioned that again, different strokes for different folks, but I have talked to other guests that have given up drinking and said it's amazing how much you can get accomplished and how much you can experience when you do that. However, it's also nice sometimes to have a glass of wine to unwind. So whatever works for you. But obviously, talking to you and with any outside salesperson for sure, you would not be happy behind a desk. And
No,
that is one of the things I'm sure that you love about sales, variety and getting out.
just meeting people, finding what makes them tick, what's important in their company, especially if they're an owner or if they're in the middle of retirement, which I know a lot of people that are retiring right now and they're handing over the reins to either a family member or somebody who's been a long time employee for decades. And so there's a lot of change going on. And I love seeing the change. I love seeing the younger people who just graduated from college get out there, and it's so rewarding to see the generations that are out there right now. In sales, I think for me, it's giving someone a product that they really know will perform. And I've always been in construction knowing that it's watertight and, water control. That's really, it's raining right now, actually, which is kind of funny we're talking about this, but I'm all about water control and keeping things watertight. If you can have that in a house or a building, I mean, that's really all you need.
Right? You don't have that. In fact, somebody in our neighborhood, I noticed a tarp on their roof, and then the next thing I know, they're getting their roof replaced. So it can be one of those things that people don't appreciate until there's a problem.
Yes, I'm one of those people that when I travel for sales, the first thing I do when I get into my hotel room is open the curtains and look out the window. I'm probably looking at a roof, and I'm no technical expert, but I can tell you exactly what's wrong and what are some things that shouldn't be up there, like classroom desks or balls or a person without, the right safety equipment. I mean, it's funny the things that you pick up along the way when you see a ladder that's just hanging out on a roof and there's no one there. That probably shouldn't be there.
That reminds me of back in the day when I was selling mufflers, and this may still happen. I never see it, but I saw every muffler that had fallen off and was beside the road. And I think now cars are much better and people's mufflers aren't falling off as often, but I saw every muffler, like you said. And of course, it's your reticular activating center. That's what you notice, and it's your world. And so, yeah, I'm sure you're like, oh, that's not right.
Yeah, it's hard seeing people walk on a roof with no safety equipment, especially where they're on a steep slope roof. I don't work in residential. I never have. I've always been commercial. But when you see these guys running around on top of a brand new house in a neighborhood, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I do not want to see them fall.
Right. I have a friend that had a pressure washing company and he fell off a roof, broke his
Hmm.
back, but he ended up being fine. But yeah, you don't want to be on a roof without safety equipment.
So, Kay, I know this is your podcast, but I have a
Yes.
question for you.
Great. And you know what? We are at 30 minutes, so I will answer your question and then we probably need to wrap up. But I'd love to have a question. Turn it around on me.
Okay, my question is, what are your thoughts on these mufflers that are made to be louder on a lot of these little old sport vehicles that my neighbors are using right now? They are very, very loud. Should that happen? Should a
I,
muffler be that
as
loud?
a senior, I say absolutely not. It should not be like that. Some of them are so loud, the dishes in your house rattle. I'm surprised it's even legal. Now, back in the day, we had performance mufflers, but they were never that loud. But I remember those were really popular in the rural areas where they probably didn't have a whole lot else to do, drive fast cars. But I don't know much about that question. I hate it. I'll tell you that. I also think that there should be volume limits on these speakers because you drive up to next to a car, and again, it's like, wow. And I think, you're going to be deaf when you're my age. You're so crazy.
When I do complain about this stuff, typically in the front room of our house, my husband looks at me and says, "Okay, get off my lawn," because I do sound like that person of mature age that says, "Get off my lawn. Stop with the noise in the car."
Well, as
So
long as he doesn't call you a Karen. But but yeah, that is a young person. You never see anyone, I guarantee you, over 30 with those loud cars.
I
That
sure
might not
hope
be
not.
true. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about a closing thought, something that someone can do, an action step they can do in the next day or week. What do you recommend?
Not only for business, but also for personal. Pick up the phone and call someone. I know we have different generations. I'm a texter, but I also love phone calls and I have to check email. You can't get around email, but pick up the phone. People love hearing someone on the other side of the phone. You can get things done pretty quickly as well. Sometimes you have to email. Sometimes there's a thread, you just can't call someone. But I'd say for the most part, pick up the phone, follow up, make someone else smile. Smile in your own voice when you answer the phone and when you call someone else. That's the most important.
Well, that is great advice. And I know every listener will have some new tips and ideas, but also encouragement, inspiration. Like you said, when we were young, we had to learn. We had to learn to hone our skills and be authentic, be ourselves, and to provide an ideal solution for the customer. And as you said, talk to them via the method that they want to be communicated with. So I think that's a great place to end. And Melissa, it's been a delight talking with you last week and today. I really appreciate you being on the podcast. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kay.
Okay, over and out.